Users on the Bitcoin network are growing at an insane pace. There was 1.2 million users that were added in the last 30 days, which does not include exchange users or anything like that. On-chain, Willy Woo, the OG of On-Chain Metrics, went and pulled this chart together, and he said users on the Bitcoin network is now growing at its fastest rate ever. 1.2 million users were added in the last 30 days. It does not include off-chain users on exchanges, which typically sees up to 3x the number. Now, we know that Coinbase's earnings that just came out for Q2, it was estimated they were going to have around 63 million verified users. Instead, it came in at 68 million verified users. So obviously, there is much more growth than people had expected in Q2. What we are seeing right now is that we are watching this on-chain user growth, 1.2 million users. It is the equivalent of onboarding a country the size of El Salvador every 2 to 3 months. Absolutely nuts when you start thinking about the growth that we're experiencing here. If we then go and we look, our best friend, Will Clemente, the on-chain, if Willie's the OG, Will represents the new age of on-chain metrics. 76.8% of Bitcoin's money supply is held by strong hands. We've known that strong hands hold a majority of Bitcoin. It now has topped 76%, 76.8%. And so throughout the asset speculative history, a larger percentage of supply became liquid. That was until March 2020, when the strong hands started to get super aggressive and a new type of market participant has emerged. So when we start looking at these two data points, basically the rate of growth, 1.2 million users coming onto the network, and then 76.8% of the money supply being held by strong hands. What that means is this is a continuation of the supply squeeze. Remember, if the 18.7 million Bitcoin or so that are in circulation, 76% of them are being held by strong hands. They're not selling that. That means that those 1.2 million people or entities that are coming onto the Bitcoin network, just on chain, not including exchanges, they only have about 25% of the circulating supply of Bitcoin to actually attempt to buy. It means that there is less supply available, which means if you want to buy Bitcoin, you will have to continue to increase your bid, the amount of money you're willing to pay to buy that Bitcoin. And therefore, a supply squeeze works where strong hands accumulate Bitcoin, hold on tight, new users come in, increase in demand, lack of supply drives price up. I don't predict the future. I don't know what's going to happen today or tomorrow. What I do know, though, is that over a long period of time, Bitcoin, in my personal opinion, is likely to be much, much higher than it is today. The on-chain metrics do not lie. You can easily see how many users are coming on-chain, 1.2 million in the last 30 days. You can easily see who's holding Bitcoin versus who's willing to sell. And so we are going to continue to cover this because, in my opinion, this is the most important story in all of finance because this asset stands from a market structure standpoint to continue to be the best performing asset in the world. Bitcoin was the best performing asset over the last decade. It has not gotten the respect that it deserves in the finance world. People now believe that history is not a performance of the future. Of course, that is true. But I still believe Bitcoin will be one of, if not the best performing assets moving forward. And so we're going to continue to cover this because if that is true, then that is going to be one of the most important assets in the world. So Joe, John, what do you guys think about this data in terms of actually watching user growth kind of accelerate and take off in a way that it's never done before? And then also just so many strong hands actually holding such a high percentage of the Bitcoin supply.
Yeah, so I don't think it's very surprising, right? Like we know all of this. Bitcoin has a programmatic supply. It's constrained. There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin in existence, right? And 18.75 million are already in circulation or kind of in the market. And 17% of that have not been moved in 7 years, right? So that's the amount that they think are either lost or people have died or whatever and will not come back into circulation. So that's 17%, a large portion of already kind of the existing supply. And then you add in on another 60% of that of people who haven't moved the Bitcoin in a year. So strong hands and do not sell, right? So when you think about it from the increasing demand, the network here, from retail to institutional, just natural supply and demand economics are going to play out, right? It's a fixed supply or constrained. It's only going to be 21 million at the end, and demand keeps increasing. When institutional buyers keep coming into the market, all you really need is another few of these countries to say, hey, we're going to make it legal tender. We're going to put it on our balance sheet. A couple companies to do the same thing, right? And you start to quickly see how that fixed and constrained supply is going to drive the price much higher.
When you also look at the strong hands, they're not only buying Bitcoin and holding on to it, but they're also taking it off of exchanges as well. And so when you start to look at the order books, you can just see that there's less and less Bitcoin that's actually available on the exchange. Willie and Will have both been all over this for months now. And so what ultimately occurs is this market structure leads to price appreciation, just like we saw back in October and November, that market structure set up, and then we saw a 500-600% increase in the price. It is likely setting up for something similar here. And when that happens, then institutions come in as well. It's almost like the price increase leads to people with FOMO. That FOMO drives more demand. As more demand comes in, the market structure was already set, and it further drives the price. And so I don't know how high or severe this kind of supply squeeze will be. But if we just repeat what happened in October, that was a 500+%, right? We went from 10,000 or so to about $64,000. If that was to occur from here, we're talking about $200,000+ Bitcoin price, right? And I'm not necessarily predicting that's where we're going. I'm just saying that the exact same market structure is setting up. And if we get a 5 to 6x kind of jump from this point, that puts us at over $200,000 price by the end of the year.
Ooh, is that a price prediction?
That is not a price. I still say $100,000 by the end of 2021. I said it back from 2019. I'm not changing. Never waffled. I stuck with it, and I still think that to be true. But I do think that when you start to look at the market structure, it is replicating a lot of what we saw in October 2020 and into kind of the Q4 area there. And what you saw was we literally went from 10 to 30. It was like that. I mean, we just exploded upwards, crossed over 30K right around January 1st or kind of end of December. And then we went from 30 to 64 between January and March. Like, this stuff happens fast. And so in a compressed timeline of 4 to 5 months, what do we have left the rest of this year? 4 to 5 months. And so if we get that market structure to kind of take off like that, I'm just saying that if it happened, I wouldn't be surprised, right, John?
With these amount of users on the network, does that make Bitcoin's drawdowns less important or less serious?
What do you mean?
So Bitcoin notoriously has seen 30 to 50% drawdowns after the halvings, right, of the price. Does that make those drawdowns less serious, or I guess there's less of a drawdown because there's more users, so the supply and demand economics?
So actually what happens is when there's market illiquidity, it leads to more volatility, right? So there was an example a couple of years ago, and I'm not gonna get all the details correct, but I think it was Tilray, which was one of the first major cannabis stocks to go public. I think it went public in the Canadian markets. And again, for overgeneralized manner, they only floated a certain portion of the stock. Like, let's say it was, I'll exaggerate, 1% of the stock, right? So if there's 100 shares, they only put 1 share in the market. And by doing that, what happened was as users wanted to come in or investors wanted to come in and actually own that stock, there wasn't enough available. So what did they do? They all started bidding on that 1% of the shares. And so it led to this massive price increase. There was like hundreds of percent of appreciation in the stock. It was nuts. And so what you do is you basically take the share price, multiplied by the number of shares, and you get a market cap. And the business was trading at some ridiculous multiple. It was because there was a structural advantage for the business by only floating so many of the shares. Now, they have the decision to do that. Usually when that occurs, what do businesses do? They take some of their additional shares that aren't in the market, they sell them into the market, they raise capital, and there's a whole kind of capital market strategy. What we're watching here with Bitcoin is that there is no strategy. There's no centralized executive team. There's no CEO. There's no board. There's no any of that stuff. This is actually the reverse. This would be the equivalent of, let's say, Amazon stock. The three of us got together and we had, trillions of dollars, and we started going and just buying up as much of the Amazon stock as we could. And we were able to get our hands on 10% of the stock. Okay, we said we're never moving it. We could buy 20%, 30%, 40, 50, 60, 76%. And we put it on the side and say, we're not going to sell this. What would the Amazon stock do? Everyone else who wants to own Amazon, it's all bidding on about 25% or so. It would explode in price, right? So this is not a Bitcoin specific market structure advantage. This is how markets work in general. The difference here is that we can very, very clearly and easily see who owns the Bitcoin, where is the Bitcoin sitting, and are they historically sellers, buyers, or just pure holders of Bitcoin? Because the on-chain metrics don't lie.
Yeah, look, I think it just goes back to sometimes it's easiest to simplify it, right? And just go back to the supply and demand. And if you look at it from everything that's happening, right? Countries are making Bitcoin legal tender. Companies like MicroStrategy, Square, and others have put hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins on their balance sheet and purchased them. There's companies like Crypto.com and FTX that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on sponsorships now to continue marketing their products. And you just look at it from the standpoint of now professional athletes are taking their salaries and their endorsement money, millions of dollars annually in crypto, right? And Bitcoin specifically. And then you just look at it from the perspective of like, okay, what happens if institutions start flowing back in? What if one more big company puts it on their balance sheet? What if one country puts it on their balance sheet, right? And you start to see how quickly it can start to appreciate in price based on just those supply and demand metrics of how many people are holding it long-term, are not selling, how much Bitcoin is lost or out of circulation, and how much is actually coming into the market on a supply basis every year.
Lack of liquidity leads to volatility. Volatility works in both directions, up and down. And with an asset like Bitcoin, where the macro tailwind is that demand continues to increase, we literally saw Willie point out that it was the highest rate of new users coming into the network in a 30-day period, 1.2 million new users, tends to lead to, if there is going to be lack of liquidity, check, and there's going to be increased demand, check, then the probability is that the price will drastically increase in the future. Not financial advice, not predictions. I just am telling you what the OnChain metrics are saying. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching that clip of the Best Business Show. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you know when we go live every weekday, and then head to SoFi.com/Pomp so that you can get an account and we can get after it.